I'm Wamal Owens. My address is Chesterwood Retirement Community, 8073 Tylersville Road, apartment 15, Westchester, Ohio, 45069. I was born in West Monroe, Louisiana on November the 11th, 1931. My father had a grocery store.
No, let's stick with that.
Oh, okay. November the 11th, 1931. Enlisted in the. You don't want me to put that?
I want your service
I can
number.
tell you when I was enlisted.
Okay.
That was October the 14th, 1952.
Okay, we'll get to that, but if you just give your service number.
All right, my officer service number is 04024-838, and they changed that over to my Social Security number. Do you need me to add that?
No.
Yes, sir.
Okay, if you would then, would you please tell us where you were born?
In West Monroe, Louisiana, November the 16th, 1931.
And your branch of service, please?
Was Army Military Police.
Okay. How did you get in the military police? Is that, excuse me, I'm wrong about that. Was that your first entrance into the service, was with the military police?
On active duty, yes, sir. What it is, they had an ROTC unit at the university, and all the people that went through the school became military police officers, and that's how I ended up being a military policeman. Yeah.
Sir, could you tell us about your education?
I took a 4-year course and I became an elementary school teacher.
No, let's talk about Northeastern Louisiana State University. You went to school there?
Yes.
Okay. Then what happened with the service?
Well, after I finished, I got my commission the 19th of May, 1954. But I didn't receive my commission like all the rest of them because 2 of the people were checked by the FBI for a national security report. There was nothing wrong with me, but they ended up not giving me my commission until the 30th of June, because the first part of June I was already scheduled for summer camp in an artillery unit as a corporal. And so when the 1st of June came along, I reported to my unit and they put us on a bus.
Well, excuse me, you were there as a corporal, as an enlisted man, in essence, in the early years of the ROTC.
I was enlisted man while I was in ROTC,
right.
But when I got my ROTC commission, I also had the enlisted rank, and the enlisted rank called for me to go to summer camp. Well, I was supposed to go as an officer, but since the paperwork wasn't through, they said, you got to go as a corporal. So I went as a corporal, and people called me the corporal lieutenant. But anyway, they said, he's going to be an officer. We're going to make sure he knows what it's like to be an enlisted man. So the first thing I did once I got there, and this was down at Fort Hood, Texas. And we even went down there on a military train. And the train drove us right out into the camp and then dumped us out into some barracks. And then we went out in our pup tents. Well, we had to fire the 105 artillery, so I had to learn how to do that. But the captain knew I was going to be an officer, and some of the others said, well, let's let him have KP duty. And when I got through with that, the next thing to give me was a GI party, cleaning the commodes. And then I got KP duty, cutting up potatoes and helping in the kitchen. And then they put me on guard duty, and I had to stand guard all night. And there wasn't nothing that they couldn't throw at me that I didn't get to do. But I did survive.
Oh, excuse me. Well, this is for a 2-week period. You were there for a 2-week summer camp.
Yeah.
Is what that was. Okay.
And when I got through with the summer camp, I came back, and the people at the college had called my house and left word for me to come see them. So when I got back, I went out to the college, and on the 30th of June, I was sworn in as an officer and presented my certificate and serial number.
Excuse me. Before you did that, how many summer camps did you attend before you received your commission?
One.
Okay, that was like your senior year.
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't make the one that they had before when I was in the reserves, because I was in an ROTC summer camp.
Okay, right.
I had 6 weeks of it, and that was in 53. Well, I graduated in 54 in May, and then in June of 54 is when I went to summer camp.
Okay, very good.
But I was still an enlisted man when I went to summer camp.
Okay, can you tell us a little bit of what transpired after you received your commission before you were actually sent on active duty?
Well, after my summer camp incident, I applied for a teaching job. Well, the superintendent assigned me to teach 6th grade at a school called Schwartz. It was out where a bunch of carbon plants were, so that's a German name for black. So I taught 6th grade at Schwartz. Well, my orders said I was to report the 1st of January in 55. Well, I wanted to change them where I could finish the school year, but I talked to somebody that's connected with the military, and he said, they've got all these schools filled up. You better take the one they got you scheduled for. So I just went ahead and went on active duty the 1st of January 1955. And I left, drove. It took me about 2 days to get to Fort Gordon.
Excuse me, while you were teaching, what grade did you teach?
6th grade.
6th grade, thank you.
And when I got to Georgia, I had a car, so I went to camp as an officer, and it was all the difference between the officer camp and the enlisted camp. I had my own private room, and we went to classes as a group of officers, and they lectured to us, and then every week we'd get a big exam, a multiple choice, and you had to pass each of those exams or have an average of a pass in order to get your commission certified. So I went through that, and one of my classmates was up there close to me, and he just sort of cracked up. So they kicked him out. But he asked for it, I think.
Excuse me, you mean because of his actions, or because of he flunked out of the school?
He was flunking out of school.
Okay.
And then he just wanted to give it up. He said he didn't want to be an officer anyway.
Okay.
So they finally just discharged him and sent him home.
They discharged him?
Huh?
They discharged him?
Well, he asked to be.
Well, yeah, I know, but it seems like if you flunk out of OCS or you go to an enlisted man, you're not released from the service.
Well, he cracked up to the point they released him and sent him home.
Okay, well maybe he had mental problems or something.
Yeah, he had some problems.
Okay, well this...
And they let him go. Well, I went ahead and finished my schooling, and then when I finished, I had orders to go to Europe. So as soon as I got out of school, then I had to report to go overseas. Well, they wanted me to go to New Jersey, so I drove my car up there, and I had to park it because I wanted them to ship it overseas.
Excuse me, what kind of car was it? Do you remember in the year?
It was a 51 Ford four-door sedan, V8, automatic transmission.
With the Fairlane?
Sir?
Was that a Fairlane Ford?
It was, I guess it was probably the top line.
Yeah, well, okay. Seemed like that would have been a Fairlane.
Yeah, well, let's call it a Fairlane. Anyway, it got me up there, and of course we shipped it overseas. Well, they wanted me to fly. So I went to McGuire Air Force Base, spent the night after I turned my car in, and then the next day a bus took us down and put a whole bunch of us on an airplane. It was a 4-engine naval airplane, and
Excuse me, before you did that, you had problems getting on the airplane with weight?
now my weight didn't bother me. Yeah,
Okay.
well, I only had 2 suitcases, and when we got all my stuff in it, I weighed them and I was over 5 pounds. They said, well, you're not going to ship anything that's over 45 pounds. So I went through my suitcase and started throwing stuff away. So I got rid of as much as I could to get that 5 pounds. So I ended up having all my military uniforms, but I only had one civilian suit. I had to get rid of all my other civilian clothes in order to get my weight right, because there were certain things you had to have and to carry with you, and that was combat boots, and they took a lot of weight. And so when I got that worked out, well, then I was ready to get on the plane, and it took us about 24 or 28 hours to make the trip, because we had a propeller plane, and it flew from McGuire, and we had to gas up. And what did they do? They gassed up in Greenland or Iceland or somewhere over in there, and then while they gassed up, we had to get off the plane. And then when they got the plane gassed up, well, then we got back in, and that was middle of the night. Well, once we got back on the plane, they proceeded to go toward Germany. Well, we got to where England was, we didn't stop. We got to France, we didn't stop. We just flew over them. And they'd say, well, Paris is down there. Well, I couldn't see what was down there anyway. But we landed in Frankfurt, Germany, at Rhine-Main. That was the place that most military people that were coming in from the States, that's where they ended up. So when I got to Rhine-Main, we got out, and then they give you your suitcases, then they put you on a bus. Well, I put my stuff on the bus, and then I turned to see the guy that was from Monroe was with me. Was he there? Well, he hadn't quite got up there to get on the bus. So I said, you better get over here to get on this bus. They had 2 of them. Well, that bus driver, because I didn't step on there, just shut the door and drove off with my suitcases.
Excuse me, do you recall that fellow's name?
He was just an enlisted man, and that was his job, was driving.
Okay.
And,
No, I mean the fellow that's from Monroe.
The other guy, I knew it, and then all at once I didn't.
Okay, that happened.
He was another officer. But the next bus, we both got on it. And when we got to where we got unloaded, they brought us in this building, and it is where they processed you. Well, I got in there and asked for my luggage, and the guy said, "You should have had them with you." And I said, I told him what happened. He said, "Well, I don't know where it's at." Well, it just so happened the door was open to an office next to where he was, and there was my 2 suitcases.
Well, you're lucky.
sitting there. I spotted them, and I said, "There they are." So he let me get them, and so we spent the night in some kind of a place that they had us stay. And the next day we had our orders ready, and my orders called for me to go to Berblingen, Germany, which is in Bavaria, southern Germany. My friends had orders for La Rochelle, France. So we got on the German train, and for a while we were on the same train, but he had to change and go to another train, and I stayed on this one, and I stayed on it till it got where I was supposed to get off. And we pulled into the station there at Berblingen, and so I got off with my suitcases, and I stood there and figured out, so I got to figure out where my location is. And I was assigned to the 385th Military Police Battalion. Well, I didn't know where that was, but it had it on the orders. So I said, "Well, no, I'll just get a taxi and let him do it." So there was a taxi driver there, and I signaled for him, and he helped me get my stuff on board, and I showed him where my orders were, and he said, "Okay." He cranked his car up, made a U-turn, and stopped. He said, "There is your station." I was right opposite it when the train stopped. If I'd have known, I could have walked on over there rather than to get in a taxi.
Did he charge you?
He charged me
Do you remember how much?
5 marks. That was $1.25.
That's something.
Yeah, but it's like 5 marks would be like $5.
Yeah.
But he did charge me because he was trying to make a living. Well, I got off with my stuff and I walked up to the gate. Well, the guard would not let me come in. He said, "Well, you're new," so he called the office and had the duty order officer come down. Well, he come down, and he was somebody I'd been in ROTC camp with.
I'll be there.
Yeah, and so we talked a minute. He said, "Well, we know where to put you." And I said, "Well, I just appreciate knowing you."
Excuse me, do you recall his name?
His name was Victor Call,
Thank you.
and Victor said he was Vern Johnson. Well, Vern Johnson was the colonel in charge of the battalion, and he played like he was the colonel even though he wasn't, but he was representing him as duty officer. So anyway, we got checked in, and they put me in a BOQ, and then the next day,
Excuse me, BOQ is Bachelor's Office Quarters.
Bachelor Officer's
There you
Quarters. So then I had to report in, so I went through the adjutant, and one of the adjutant assistants was the first lieutenant, and he had a Masonic ring on. Well, I had a Masonic ring on because I had just gotten my degrees in December before I went in the Army in January. And I started my degrees when my birthday was 16th of November. You had to be 21 years old. Well, I got an old man that was blind, and he knew masonry. And every day I'd get off from school, I'd stop and carry him for a ride. And he'd lecture me, and I learned all 3 of those degrees. in that short length of time. And every time I'd go to the lodge, they'd have a meeting every 2 weeks. I'd get a new degree. So I got my last degree just before I had to leave. It was pretty close to Christmas.
Yeah.
So I got my third degree, and then I went on active duty. Well, when I got over there, I had my ring, and in the military, a Masonic ring will open a lot of doors for you because a lot of the higher ranking officers are in the Masonry. So since I had that, well, the first lieutenant that was a Mason, he said, "Lieutenant Owens, you need to meet with me." This was the end of the day, and so I met him, and he said, "Well, we got an appointment." Well, we stood out there, and here come the colonel with his driver, and he had a private chauffeur with a car that all senior officers have. And he pulled up, and we got in the car with him. Because he was a Mason, but he had just gotten his degrees through special orders allowing him to get it all in one day. Because he was in the service. Well, he wanted to go to lodge, and he didn't know the stuff to take you to get in a lodge. But he figured that the lieutenant and me just getting the degrees, we ought to know how to get him into the lodge. So we addressed him with some secret passwords and signs, and we all went to lodge together. And it was one they called the Stuttgart American Lodge, and it was one set up specially for military. And
Okay, so you were getting settled in with that. What about?
well, now I'm going to tell you some more of that. We got there, and I was in that one. They wanted to organize a new lodge, so they ended up getting a German lodge to sponsor an American lodge under their jurisdiction. So we set up Hiram Lodge, a deputy lodge under the lodge of the Three Cedars, and I became an officer in that deal. And we organized it as a new one, and we took in new Masons from the Army and gave them the degrees and made them Masons, because they didn't have any way to make a Mason unless you had a real lodge, and the Stuttgart American couldn't take new Masons. So we were set up to do that. So a lot of people want to be a Mason. All they had to do is put in a deal for them, and they put me on the committee to approve them. I didn't have anybody I disapproved. If they ever recommended by somebody, I said that was good enough.
If they applied, that was it. Okay, what about your automobile?
Well, my automobile came into Bremerhaven. Well, they took about 6 weeks for it to get there. And when I got orders that the car was in, then they give me transportation so that I could go up there. So I got a train, and it carried me to Bremerhaven. And when I got there, I went into the port there and introduced myself and showed them I had the title to the car, and so they let me sign for the car. Well, I went out to get the car. I found out the car only had 2 gallons of gas in it. They took all the gas I'd had in it and drained it out. Well, I just filled it up before I parked it, so I lost a tank of gas. But anyway, after they gave me the car, I went to the first gas station I could go to and filled it up. Well, there happened to be another guy getting a car, and he was going to the same place that I was going, and which was Stuttgart, and so we drove along together. and he'd already been overseas and was going back again, so he pretty well knew his way. And so we were moving along in the evening, and he pulled over and he said, "There's some girls walking down here, you need to pick one up."
All right, go ahead.
So anyway, I give her a ride and then let her go. And then he and I followed each other all the way down to Stuttgart. And so I went to my place and he went to his. And I think I saw him maybe once after that, but that was about it.
What about the gasoline? Do you recall what the price of gas was at that time? Did you get any special deals?
Gas was about 75 cents a gallon for the Germans, but if you were military active duty, you could go in to the PX, Post Exchange, and they had coupon books that they'd sell you. Well, if you had a car, you were allowed a coupon book, the big one, for 100 gallons. So they let us buy the gas at the exact price the federal government paid for it, for all these big pieces of machinery that had to have gas. So, and we could buy it at the GI station, but we had to give them the coupons. So I bought me a 100-gallon coupon book. I paid for it cash. It cost me $10. Gas was 10 cents a gallon, and then that's all I needed for a month's running.
Yeah.
And it worked out where I spent about $10 a month for gas.
Well, you must have had some road trips then, huh?
Had what?
Road trips? On the weekends or when you were...
Oh yeah, road trips. Well, I got with, some of my buddies, and we'd ride out somewhere just to see something, And sometimes we'd spend a night and see something, but we went to a castle or two and several things like that. And we even went to Munich. And then when we were in Munich, we went to the opera house where the big German beer hall where Hitler got started, and they make big liter pictures, and I think it cost about a mark, which was 25 cents. And we bought a liter of beer, and we drank it, and I'm gonna tell you, that stuff was so powerful. I didn't want the second one because I was driving, but some of the others, it took two of them, and they wasn't able to drive. But while we were sitting there at the table drinking, we were looking at all these Germans in there singing, and they had a band over there playing music, and some of them people were sitting on those benches drinking that beer, and after a while, they'd fall off. They were so drunk they couldn't sit there. Well, when they did that, two men had come over and pick them up and drag them over to the corner, and there was a big pile of drunks over there in the corner, and they just laid them out. Well, you could look at them and see they was all drunk. Well, they was so full of beer, they were just pissing all over themselves, and there was a big pile of piss around every one of them. And so I laughed about that. But
Now, were they serving that beer warm or cold? Or both?
it was mostly warm.
Was it? Wow. And that's some high-powered beer too, wasn't it?
Oh, it was
Just
strong.
like ale?
It was strong. One time I drank one and I got the second one, but I didn't quite finish it because I didn't want to get drunk.
Yeah, right.
I didn't ever drink any beer till I got over into Germany. I did a lot of things I never did until I got in Germany. I didn't know what a woman. One of the places we went to just to visit was what you call the Rhine Falls, where the Rhine River fell over from Switzerland into a ravine, and it helped form the Rhine River. We looked at that, that was real beautiful, but near it was another tourist attraction, which was a pole with three flags on it. Each pole corner had a different, and the pole was a three-sided instead of four. And one side was on the Swiss side, one was on the French side, and one was on the German side. So if you went up to that pole and had your picture made, you could see you were standing at the three places. And if you walked around it, you went from one country to the other, all within just making a circle.
A couple steps.
So we got to do that, and that was quite interesting.
Did you get to visit any of the concentration camps?
Yes, when we went to Dachau, after we saw the Opera House, then we went over to the concentration camp there in Munich, which they called Dachau. And it had a big wire fence, and you could go in there and tour it. And inside, you could see where the showers were, where they would tell them to take their clothes off, you're going to get a shower. But when the water started running, it didn't run much until they turned the gas on, and they all toddled over dead. Well, they had a big bunch of clothes piled up there with shoes and everything that they could give to somebody else because these people were dead. Well, these ones they were doing that to were Jews. Well, they would drag the Jews up, and then they had a place there with a big old oven where you could stick a stretcher inside there with a body on it and turn on the heat and just completely burn the body up till it was ashes. And when they got that done, they'd pull it out and dump it on the ground. Another guy would take a rake and rake through the ashes to see if there was any metal in it, because when they burned you up, a lot of people had metal in their mouth and their teeth. So they stole that out to, melt it down and sell it, gold and silver. So they did that. Well, all these ashes, they just sent them by the wheelbarrow load out and dumped them on a pile. They built up a nice little mound of nothing but ashes. Well, they had some flowers growing there, and on some of them they had on top of them. Well, you could see the ashes, and it was just sort of gruesome to see all that. But anyway,
Were you ever able to attend any of the Oktoberfests there?
yeah, they had a big Oktoberfest in Munich, and they usually had one in each little town. And the one they had in Stuttgart and Berlin was not near as big as the one they had in Munich. Well, we went to the one in Munich, and they pumped up some beer. It was what they call Oktoberfest beer, and it capped out about twice the amount of kick in it that the regular beer. So we had a few of those. But
Did you ever have any directive about drinking water off base?
we were told not to drink water off base because it was not approved, and all our water had to be filtered through a big chlorine tank, and we could drink it on post, but we could not drink it off post. He said, you either bring your water in your canteen, or you drink wine or beer or schnapps. You cannot drink water. So I didn't
It's pretty
drink
easy.
water. I drank water, but I didn't outside, so I ended up learning what schnapps was, which was whiskey that the Germans had. And then I could drink the beer, and I liked the white wine they had.
It's pretty easy following that directive then, wasn't it?
Yeah, you just had to, and it was cheap. you could get a big bottle of wine and get drunk on it. And it didn't cost much money.
Now I'm curious, did you receive any special mail while you were there?
Well, I got mail from home. That's the only place I got mail from.
Mail, and what about packages? Any special packages?
Well, my dad sent me a little box with some stuff in it, and on it had a label. This can was sealed up, and he said, "This is squirrels that I killed, and I cooked them and canned them, and you can have them." So I had squirrels as a meal once.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
That is really, really
Yeah.
neat.
But he wanted me to know what squirrels were like, and so I got that.
Yeah, very
Now, I
good.
couldn't get any cornbread over there, and I love cornbread. But they had something over there similar to Fritos, but it wasn't Frito, but it was still a corn chip.
Corn chip.
And that's what I'd eat for cornmeal. And
Well, what about some of your duties? I mean, you're over there in the service now, and we've talked about a lot of recreation. What about actual GI work?
well, my first duty officer assignment, and I hadn't been there very long. And what you do, you do duty on post, but every officer has to rotate and do the sub-area duty. Well, you might get that after about once every 2 weeks, depending on how many officers, and each had to have their turn. So I was on the list for that. Well, I wasn't there for about 2 weeks, and my name came up. Well, I had to spend the night downtown at the military police station. Well, they had a desk sergeant there and a duty officer. We had all these jeeps running around doing town patrol, and I was supposed to supervise them. Well, they had a jeep and a driver for me and a German policeman. We'd ride around and see what the men were doing, and they were doing a good job. But if you walk in one of these honky tonks, well, you come in there as an officer with that big MP thing on your shoulder and a big 45 hooked onto you. They kind of settled down. They didn't want no trouble, and we represented a lot of power. So we just walked through, nodded, and went on out. But somebody said, "Well, you go back there the next night, all them old gals will recognize you. They gonna be wanting to get close to you." And that's the way it was.
Is that right?
But anyway, I did that. Well, I come back, and I had a requirement that the duty officer have a head count in the confinement area after 12 o'clock at night. So I went in and counted the prisoners and made it a report on my report that how many were there, that was so many and then that many present, and sign my name and the time. Then I laid down to go to sleep. I wasn't there 30 minutes. I just about got to sleep when they knocked on the door and said, "Lieutenant, you're wanted on the phone." Well, I got up and went in there and got on the phone. And then somebody said, "This is somewhere," said there was an airplane crash on a little mountain, and it was a C-141, or no, C-124. It was one of the big tanker type planes, and it had crashed, and it was a foggy night. Well, we had to go check that out. Well, before I could, I had to, according to the manual, we had to notify the Red Cross, the ambulance, Army ambulances, and the police, and then we had to make us a a convoy to go up there and check it out. And so I was leading the convoy, so we drove up the mountain as far as a Jeep would go, but we wasn't at the top of the mountain. At that point, we just had to stop and get out. Well, the sergeant I was with, he had on boots. I had on low quarter shoes. So my shoes didn't track too well going up that hill. But that's all I had, so I made it. And part of the way I slipped and fell. Well, he grabbed me because I was about to slide off into a sort of a and I didn't know what it was, but I had an interpreter. Said they just trying to tell you they've been watching everything. Well, I had to go through and count bodies. I found 9 dead people out there laying in scattered around. They were black as they could be, and most of them's lips had shrunk to the point you could see their teeth. So I counted 9 of them. And then I found the airplane and got the serial number off the tail of it. And while I was doing all that, some of these firemen were digging around the edge of it. Well, all this ground was soaked with gasoline, but it had stopped burning. But when they started raking in the dirt and unearthed fresh spaces, the oxygen caused it to burn, because we still had some burning all the time. And all at once I looked and I was sitting in the middle of a circle of fire.
Whoa.
So it didn't take me long to get out of there. I put it in high gear and I jumped out. And well, we had to stay there all night. But the Air Force sent somebody in and they showed up a little after daylight, about 7 o'clock, and so once we were relieved, we took the names of the airmen, and then we left. Well, then I had to go back to the MP station and write up a report. Well, when I got the report finished, I had to report in to the sub-area provost marshal, the colonel, and he wanted to know what went on. And of course, we give him all the information we could so that he could go in and report to whatever general wanted to know what was going on. So we give him a good list of what we did, and then I left to go back to my barracks, but I had to go back to my headquarters. And when I got to the battalion headquarters, the adjutant says, Lieutenant, you got to go see the colonel. So I went in to see the big colonel, and he wanted to know all about it. Well, I gave him all the knowledge that I knew, and Colonel Johnson thanked me. And then I went on down to the room, to the company to check in. Company commander had to have a report. So the time I got through giving all them reports, it was after 3 o'clock before I got out of there to go back and lay down. So I had been up all night and all day, and well, all day, all night, and all day.
It's about time for you to go back on duty again, wasn't it?
Man, I was tired and sleepy. But anyway, I did a good enough job that when we had a officers meeting, the colonel called all the officers together. We usually had one once a week. And he personally got up before the others, and he had me to stand up. Says, folks, this is Lieutenant Owens. He's one of our newest officers, and his first time he went on active duty at the Stuttgart substation, we had an airplane crash, and that he had to go covered. And I want you to know, he read the SOP, Standard Office Procedure. He followed it to the book, and he did a great job. And I think you other lieutenants ought to take note that whenever you have something like this, read the book and follow the rules. And he did it. He did an outstanding job. Well, that made me feel pretty good to think the big colonel had come across that strong.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So I had
Good.
my Jeep driver was on duty and my radio operator, and they had a German policeman that usually went with them, and they rode around in a Jeep. Well, my Jeep was on duty with my driver and some of my other men. Well, it just so happened that my driver supposed to took me on a inspection trip. So he showed up a little late to do it. Well, I asked him, I said, why are you late? And he said, they put me on military police duty last night, and I've been up all night, but I'm ready to go. I said, no, you're not going to take me if you hadn't slept. I will take myself. So I took the ticket that he had for the trip and wrote on it void and signed my name and the time and date. And I said, now you take that and go turn that Jeep in and you go to bed. Well, I went on and did my own inspection in my own car. Well, the poor boy that I released, he went back to his room and he laid down to go to sleep. He hadn't hardly got to sleep when here comes the first sergeant in there. Said, I got orders for everybody to go to the firing range and recertify on all your weapons. So that got him up. He had to certify he could run the two weapons that we had, the rifle and the pistol, and also the carbine. He tried all that out, and then he got through doing that. He'd been up all day and all night. Well, so helped me when he got back from the guard duty, the firing range, somebody wasn't watching what he's doing, so he was back on duty that night.
Whoa.
No sleep for 2 days. Well, he was driving that Jeep, and they were going down a road. It was an asphalt road, and there was a lot of rain and lightning. Well, it just so happened that a bolt of lightning struck real close to the Jeep. Well, that sort of shook everybody up. Well, when it did, he sort of switched the steering wheel just enough that it caused that Jeep to flip. And it flipped over on the left side. Well, when it did, the big old gas tank they had right under the driver, the cap stuck out. Well, when it landed, that was the first thing that took a bite, and it knocked it off, and the gas poured out. Well, in the back, you had a radio, and it was hooked up to the battery, and that pulled the radio loose, and it caused a big spark, and that spark ended up setting everybody ablaze. So all three of the men in the Jeep burned up. And since that was in my platoon, I had to go inspect it. Well, I did, and I found out that the bodies had been shipped off to Frankfurt. So I had to get okay to go up there, and because I had to certify that these three people was so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. So I got the records out of the file that had the dental records on them. So when I got up there, I had one black man and two white men, but they all were black. So I had to identify them. Well, if they had the dog tag, so you could do that, but we want to make sure by the records of the dental records that you had that body. And so I had somebody kind of help and do that. Well, we had a problem with one of the boys. He had a twin brother, and he was in another unit, but they sort of, since they were the same size, they swapped pieces of the uniform. And the boy that got burned up had on his brother's boots, and it had his name inside of them. So they didn't know which was that. Was it the man that was in my unit, or was it the other guy? Well, I had to go certify that. So I had to go find the other guy and check with him, and he had acknowledged that his brother had his boots. So that took care of that. And then the dental records did the others. And once they got all that taken care of, well, then they shipped the bodies back stateside. Well, these people were in my platoon, so I had to go inspect all their personal belongings, have their clothes laundered and cleaned, and packed up, labeled, and ship them to the next of kin. So I did all that, and the old boy that was my driver, he had a few pictures in there of some women, and wasn't exactly what you'd carry around and show anybody. They were naked. But when he was playing with them, he made pictures of them. So I threw all that away. Nobody got to see it. It was burned up. And then that was the only thing I felt I needed to do away with. The rest of it, I just packed it and sent it to each next of kin with a letter explaining, what a good job they'd done, but they'd lost their life in serving the country and blah, blah, blah. So the black man, his wife was in Mobile, Alabama. She sent a letter back thanking me for what I did. And then the driver was from Washington, D.C., and his mother sent me a letter thanking me for what I did for her son. But that pretty well covered my biggest two things I did when I was over there.
Yeah, that was pretty messy, wasn't it? That's a shame. That's a shame. Were you about finished with your tour then there in Germany?
Well, I was there 18 to 20, well, I think about 20 months.
20 months. Okay.
And I did a lot of traveling. I even got my father over there, and we did some.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah, he flew over, and we went around. He and I went to that pole where the three.
Right.
And I had a picture made, and they put it in the paper back in Monroe.
Well, did you?
Yeah, and then we went on over and showed him Dachau and Munich and the Opera House, and he had a beer there. Then we went on over to Garmisch and Berchtesgaden, and that was where Hitler had his hideout, and we went up to what they call the Eagle's Nest.
Eagle's Nest, right.
And we went to that. And then we drove back down, and we went over and went into Vienna, Austria, and came back. We went a little bit into Switzerland, and
well, that was great.
yeah, it was a pretty good little trip for him. And we did get back and go into Luxembourg, and we got to see Patton's grave, and then I carried him to one or two of these places where you got a big display of a castle.
Oh.
It was, we went to one or two of those.
Sure. Okay.
Well,
Okay.
when I began to buy film for my camera, well, I met a lady that was selling film, and she was one of these Czechoslovakian refugees that had come over from the Eastern Zone and got a job in the PX. And she wasn't bad looking, but she didn't know nobody. So I ended up taking her out, and we'd eat and, pal around a little bit, and I even took her to a movie. So she really fell in love with me, but I wasn't ready to get married. But all those girls are looking for a GI to marry to get over to the land of the big PX, which is the USA. Well, I wasn't ready to do that either, but I did enjoy her company, and we did do some sightseeing around close by. And then when it come time to go, I had to tell her bye, and then I come on back to the States.
Then how did you do that? How did you come back?
Okay, I flew over, but going back, I had to go back on the ship. So, and I had to send my car back. So what I did, I got all the stuff that I was leaving with that I could take in my suitcases, and I drove my car up to Bremerhaven and turned it in where they would ship it to the USA. Well, most of them shipped them to New York, but New Orleans could accept them too. So I had mine shipped to New Orleans, and when I did, well, that's where I picked it up. But when we got to...
Excuse me, but how did you get back?
I got on a ship, the Upshur. It was a troop ship.
Upshur. Okay.
Upshur, UPSER. And it was a troop ship that just carried nothing but troops from one side to the other. And since I was a first lieutenant, they made me a compartment commander. So I had to go down in the under deck there where they were at and inspect their quarters to see that everything met the standards that they supposed to. And I did that. Then we had a what they call a emergency drill. All of them had to get out within a length of time and assemble, and then you'd put them back. So I had to supervise that. But we had to eat in shifts. And of course, I ate, I guess, the early shift. And they fed real well, but the weather wasn't too good. And I wasn't used to riding in an ocean. And when the weather was bad after we left the English Channel, I began to get seasick. And one time we had a beautiful supper, and we hit one of these 40-foot waves where that ship just really bounced down. Well, I went down when the ship went down because I was with it, but the biggest thing was my stomach inside wanted to stay up, so it didn't go down as fast as we did. So all my food had to come up, but I happened to have what they called a little special bag, and everybody had to carry it all the time. And if you got sick, you had a place to put it rather than let it get on the floor. So I filled it up, and I had to get me a new one, but I was sick the whole 8 days I was on there. So my food, I don't think I lost any weight, but if I could, I probably would have. But anyway, we got across the water, and it took us an extra day to go because of the bad weather. They couldn't make the ship go as fast as they wanted to. Its normal speed was about 20.5 knots. And I guess that's about 25 miles per hour. And I had a private quarters to sleep in, a bunk, but to where it sat, when I was on the boat, and the boat would sort of, it had single screws on it instead of double. Well, when it was going, it would sort of rock back and forth. I hear it was rough, and this particular ship, most of them had twin screws. Well, if you get a twin screw ship, it'll be smoother when it goes, but if you got a single one, your ship seems to rock. Well, this was a single screw, so it would rock. So you'd be going, and then the ship would lean a little bit, and then it'd start leaning back the other way. So here I was in my quarters asleep with that bulk, and I was at an angle where when it rolled, I wanted to roll with the ship.
Yeah,
And then
better.
when it rolled the other way, I wanted to roll the other way. Well, I had trouble staying in the bed.
Yep.
But so I didn't get much sleep because of the rocking and rolling.
Okay, where did you put in the port then?
We came into New York, and we got in after dark, so I didn't get to see the Statue of Liberty. They say that's one of the most beautiful things is coming in there in the evening and you're able to see this Statue of Liberty.
They didn't have lights on her.
They didn't have enough lights on it for us to see it,
I'll be darned.
so I didn't get to see it. But when I got there, they took us off the ship, and they sent me to Fort Hamilton, which is a sort of processing place for people coming in and going out. Well, they had orders for me to go to Fort Chaffee on a train. 4 days to get there. Well, this boy I was with, he was picking his car up. So he showed them his certificate where his car was shipped to the ZI. And they went ahead and discharged him right there.
Oh,
So I had a quick thought. I had mine where I had shipped mine back. But my car wasn't with me, it's gonna be in New Orleans. Well, I showed him my ZI piece of paper, and he said, well, we'll just discharge you here.
wow.
So that's exactly what they did. They discharged me at Fort Hamilton, and I got a record to show it.
Great.
Well, when that happened, they give you travel time and per diem and all that. So I got about 4 days there pay for getting back home.
Right.
And it was quite a nice little handout. And of course, I didn't have the car, but there was a boy that I knew that picked his car up, and I caught a ride with him. He was going to Birmingham, Alabama. So time we got out, we got to Washington, D.C. I had an uncle living there, and he had some friends he had there. So what he did, he spent the night with his friend, I spent the night with my uncle. Well, while I was there with him, and he'd been a Navy officer, so he said, well, what you need to do is get a hold of the airline, and you can get a ticket space available if you're wearing your uniform, and you pay half price for the ticket. Said you could get home cheaper than you can go any other way if you'd fly, and you'd get there before Christmas.
Yeah.
So when the guy come by for me to go with him, I told him that I was going to fly. So he went on without me. So I did get a space available ticket, And I flew out of Washington, and I got down to Atlanta and got another plane heading toward Monroe. But when I got to Alabama, I think it was Birmingham, I got bumped. Because if your space available and the plane is full, you can't go. Well, I had first class most of the way, but there I got bumped. So I had to sit there 24 hours in the waiting room, and I had to sleep there or just whatever I could do. But if you get bumped, they have to give you a flight out within 24 hours. They won't let you just be left there. So I spent the night, and then I got another plane the next day, and it was to go on to Monroe. Well, when it got to Monroe, I could look outside and see the big TV tower with the red lights flashing, but there's a big fog down there and you couldn't see nothing under that. So this was a little 2-engine plane, so they announced that we were not going to land in Monroe, but that we were going to go to Shreveport due to the weather. Well, they said, we will give you motel for a night. You can catch a plane out in the morning. Or, if you don't want to do that, we'll give you a bus ticket to go back, and we'll pay for your room. And so I said, well, heck, I'll just soon get a bus ticket and ride all night and get home at daylight. Well, I got on the bus and it was full. But because I was an officer in uniform, they allowed me to stand up there by the driver until I could get a seat. But this bus was full of soldiers. It stopped at every nip and tuck town to let somebody off. So we had a lot of stops, and they had to get their luggage off and all that. And it was foggy, so the driver couldn't go very fast. It took him all night to drive that 100 miles from Shreveport to Monroe. And that was normally about a 2-hour trip. But anyway, we went ahead and crawled all the way across that night, and I got into the bus station. It was already daylight. So, and I didn't get much sleep either. But I called home to my dad, and they had a phone. I told him I was at the bus station. So boy, he come right over there and picked me up and brought me home. So I got home about 2 days before Christmas, I guess.
Well, that was nice, wasn't it?
It really was.
Gee whiz.
If I'd have gone to Fort Chaffee, I never would have got here for Christmas.
No, that's right. That's right. In fact, you might have been lucky to get out of there for New Year's Eve.
Yeah. Well, I got in before Christmas, and I was officially out of the service. So
That's great. That's great.
when I got back, I went to see the superintendent, and I taught to midterm before I left. Well, he said, you got a lady that's pregnant, and she's quitting at midterm, teaching 6th grade, which is the same thing I've been teaching, that I'm going to give that to you. So I got a job teaching 6th grade the rest of the year, and that'd give me a full year's credit. But when they started counting it, since they were 2 different years, I ended up getting credit for 2
years.
2 years credit instead of 1, which paid me an extra $100. But that was a lot of money then.
Sure.
And So I went to work in that school. Well, that's where one of my classmates was teaching. She was about the same age I had. I'd had classes with her and her brother, and we studied together. Well, she taught 4th grade and I taught 6th grade. Well, we didn't have an intercom system. So when the notes came by, the principal would let each teacher read it, sign it, and send it to the next one. Well, when my teacher the 4th grade teacher got through looking at it, then they shifted it over to me because the 6th grade was next. And so she'd send me the announcements, I'd sign them and then send them to the next room, which was the 6th grade room. Well, there was a little old girl that was real smart, and I had her brother in the 6th grade, and he was smart. Well, she got to take the notes, and he got to take them going back. Well, when I would receive one from her, she just knew that was a love note Miss Clampett was sending Mr. Owens. And her brother, when he carried one back, he knew he was carrying a love note from me to Miss Clampett. And all it was official correspondence that each teacher had to know. But the little old girl that thought she was carrying the notes, love notes,
Right.
she believed that, and later on I had that woman as a teacher, and then I later hired her as a coordinator, and she still believed that she had got us together. She was the one that got us together.
When you got back from the service, did you have any special reception other than it was the holiday, it was Christmas, so that was significant in itself?
Well, I think my mom and them had a little party at the house for some of the friends, and
Good.
we had cokes and cakes and sandwiches. And
What about any brothers and sisters?
Well, I had 2 brothers older than me, and then I had 3 sisters younger than me.
Were any of them in the service?
The oldest one had gone into the Navy
And what was his
in
name?
World War II, and he was stationed at Ford Island, but it was after Pearl Harbor.
What was his name?
His name was Mac Owens, or M.L. Owens Jr.
Okay.
And so
Is he the only other one that was in the service?
that's the only one, he and I.
Would you care to name the other
Well,
four?
the other brothers, it was Carl. Well, he had gotten in the National Guard, but then he got some preacher come through, and he got, I guess you'd say, but he felt he ought to preach.
That's good.
So he started preaching, and in fact, he went to the seminary a little bit. Well, if you're a preacher, you automatically get a deferral.
Yeah.
So he'd been in the National Guard, but whenever he got to preaching, he went ahead and resigned the National Guard. He never did do any service.
What about your sisters? What are their names?
They never went in
No,
service.
what are their names? That's all.
Oh, Nell was the oldest one. Nell, and she married a foster. They had 3 kids. She got married before anybody.
And what was your other sister's name?
Well, the next one, she finished college and started teaching, and she courted, and she married a guy that was a geologist. And then the third one, she was became a teacher, and when she did student teaching, she had to have a car. Well, she didn't. My daddy only had 1 car, and I had to have a car, and so I ended up letting her have my car because the teacher I was teaching with stopped and bought gas at the store, So she'd just stop and pick me up and take me to school in the morning and bring me back in the evening. Well, every time I'd get in that car, that was the sweetest smelling perfume I'd ever had, because she made sure it smelled good.
I can see where this is going.
Yeah, so we got to started courting after that a little bit, but she furnished me a ride there while my sister did her student teaching, and that was a half year before I could get my car back. But
That's good.
just
So
one
you,
of those,
so you ended up getting married.
yeah,
Okay, that's
having 2 kids too.
great. Through all this, there's a question. What happened to your car? It went to Louisiana.
Oh, my old car?
Yeah.
Well, the one that I had in
But when you came back from the service, your car was shipped.
to New Orleans.
Right.
Well, what I did when I was over there, I sold my car and bought another car that somebody was going back because he wanted to sell a good bargain. Well, I got a big Buick with everything on it, and this one had been manufactured over there by this, the parts shipped over and put together. So on the speedometer, it was in kilometers instead of miles. So if you look at a normal speedometer, it was 120 on it. Mine said 200.
Yeah.
And when you're going down the road, you're driving 100 on the kilometers, you're actually doing 60 miles an hour.
Yeah. Right.
But anyway, I brought it back because I thought I had it sold, but it didn't, so I brought it back. And I shipped it to New Orleans.
Now, what model was it? What year?
It was a 53 Buick.
Is it the Roadmaster, the big one? With the 3 ports on the fender?
It had 3 holes on it, I
Yeah,
think.
that was a Roadmaster.
Yeah, it was a super.
Yeah.
It was not the cheapest one.
No, that was their top of the line. What color was it? Do you remember?
Sir?
What color was it? Do you remember?
It was blue.
Pretty
A
cool.
dark blue top and a light blue bottom.
Yeah.
Two-tone.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. And I used that car and drove it all the way from Europe down to Naples in Italy.
All over Europe.
Yeah, and drove it back. But anyway, when I got it in New Orleans, I got home, they sent me a letter saying my car had arrived. Well, in those days, you had trains and they had Pullmans. And so I went down to the railroad station there in Monroe at the Missouri Pacific. They had a 10 o'clock train, and I paid, I think, $18 for a Pullman overnight that took me to New Orleans. And that train went through Alexandria, then Baton Rouge, and then New Orleans. And while I was sleeping, or supposed to sleeping, we were traveling. So about 8 o'clock the next morning, the train pulled up to the dock in New Orleans where I could get off of the train and then I could claim my car. Well, you wouldn't believe this. Whenever the train stopped, all I had to do was step out of the car, and I was looking at my car.
Come on, really?
Oh, I stepped out and my car was just like being across the street from me.
Unbelievable.
And so all I had to do was go in there and see them and sign it and fiddle.
It's almost like your trip up there in Germany.
Yeah, well, I went over, I left that night, and the next morning I was in my car heading back home. But everything was 2-lane roads, so it took me all that day to get back. But I'd stop and get something to eat and buy some gas, and I had to go through Baton Rouge. Well, they had a good road from New Orleans to Baton Rouge, but once you got to Baton Rouge, it was 2 lanes from Baton Rouge all the way to Monroe. So it slowed me down. But I got on 61, and when I got to Natchez, I had to switch over to Highway 15. Well, when I got on Highway 15, we had to go through several towns. And one town, the road came in and made a 90-degree turn to head north. Well, I was on that road and I didn't make that right turn. So I went about 4 or 5 blocks and I said, wait a minute, this is not right. And I don't know what road I was on, but it certainly wasn't 15. So I turned around, drove back, and then I saw a sign that showed 15 to the left, so I turned on it and I was back on my road. And I followed it all the way to Monroe. But
Well, Mr. Owens, is there anything else that you think you would like to add to this interview? It's been very interesting.
It's been quite interesting. Now, you get a chance, I'll let you look at my mug that the battalion presents you.
I'd like to see that.
And you drink your beer, but when you get the beer dry, you're supposed to look in the bottom of it, and it has a very nice picture of a beautiful lady that's not clothed.
We'll have to check that out.
So everybody finishes up the beer, they look at it a while before they lay it back down.
Okay. Well,
You don't see that unless you got the light on it.
Yeah. Well, I thank you very much for your contribution to the Veterans History Project, and wish you well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, the only MP mug, it's got the dates I came there and dates I left, and it's got the Stuttgart emblem.
Sir, this is very interesting. This really doesn't have anything to do with you directly, but can you tell us how you came about a medal from the Sons of the American Revolution?
Well, when I got in the chapter, we made a award to somebody for doing a heroic deed. And it was a couple boys that helped, then they let me present the medal to those boys because they knew about me rescuing them. Well, when they got the word on that, they said, we need to see what we can do about you because you never did get a medal. So they wrote a letter to the state, and the state recommended that they sent a letter to national. Well, when it got to national with the state recommendation, they sent it back with the medal, and they got me to come to Alexandria, England Air Force Base.
Well, you got it.
Yeah.
Because
well, he was a Kilpatrick, Alexander Kilpatrick. Well, we just kept following the Kilpatricks every generation up to my grandmother and my mother. And when we had blood kin line of every generation, then that qualified me to be in the Sons of the American Revolution. It also qualified any girls to get in the Daughters of the American Revolution. So I have this, and my granddaughters can get in the DAR, and my grandson can get in. And if you look on my refrigerator door, I have a big deal that's stuck on it, and it says SAR, and it says the occupant of this person has an ancestor that fought in the Revolutionary War, and you need to make a picture of that.